woman in the hospice. But last week they'd talked about Christmas, just gone. Lorna had told her about her surprisingly funny nights in the homeless shelter, more volunteering to avoid her sister Jessica's in-laws and their competitive board games. And Betty had confided what she'd been doing with her children, Peter, Susie and Ray. Her face had lit up as she described Ray's delightful Christmas cake and Peter's smart wool coat. But when Lorna had asked the nurse on duty when they'd called in, Deborah had shaken her head. No visitors. Maybe that had been an early sign that Betty was beginning to slip away, like a sand castle, slowly falling back into the lapping tide. "We're still here, Betty," she said, more bravely than she felt. It rattled Lorna, the sense of the outward Betty and her inner self invisibly detaching from each other. "Me and Rudy. It's okay." Betty herself certainly wasn't afraid of what was coming. Her stories, and she had hundreds of stories, sparkled with careless courage. Not just her nights shivering on West End rooftops, fire-watching during the Blitz when she was barely older than Lorna's niece, but afterwards when she'd married a soldier, upped sticks to Canada, only to ditch the soldier and his fists for an alcoholic Italian chef. Then she'd run a bar and sold Avon makeup, had a surprise baby at 44 with a slick lawyer called Herb, moved back to Hendon with his cash when he died. Betty's life had been one exuberant leap of faith after another, landing on her small feet each time like a cat. Lorna watched Betty floating back into the shadows of her memories, and heard that smoky voice in her head. "Fear's good for you, darling," she'd laughed, when Lorna blanched at her anecdotes. "Shows you where the edges of yourself are." "I don't want to see my edges, thanks," Lorna had said, chicken that she was. "Why not?" Betty's eyebrows were magnificent, haughty like Joan Crawford's. "Your edges might not be where you think they are." Lorna flipped through the CDs by the bed. Betty had her nailed. She didn't know where her edges were. In fact, she wondered a lot of things about herself, questions that she'd never ask because there was no one left to answer. Mum gone, Dad gone, and with that, their little world had closed up behind them, leaving her and Jessica more alone than ever. Who was she meant to be? What traits or weaknesses already brewing in her blood might emerge as the years passed and she overtook her parents into middle age and beyond? Questions and the blankness of never knowing crept up on Lorna while she was sitting up late on nights like these, when the air swarmed with memories, hers and Betty's, mingling in their shared silence. Rudy circled in his basket and laid his head on his paws. Lorna slid Glenn Miller's big band orchestra into the player. If Betty's train was departing the station tonight, she'd want something with a bit of swing to take her on to the next destination. She pressed play and picked up her knitting, bracing herself for the last half hour. Only 30 minutes. It wouldn't happen on her watch. Betty was too much of a dame for that. She knitted and listened. 2 rows, 3 rows, 4. "I can never get moss stitch right," Lorna murmured, just so Betty would know she was there. "It always goes too lumpy." But as the light moved across the room, she looked up and saw immediately something had changed. Betty's nose and cheekbones were sharpening as her breathing became phlegmy and a metallic taste began to rise in Lorna's own throat. She glanced across to the button that would summon the nurse, but then steeled herself. Not yet. She could do this. The old lady exhaled deeply, loudly, and Lorna wondered if she was seeing someone in her dreams that warranted a sigh. Someone stepping out of the wailing sirens and broken walls and dusty tea of her youth, where terror made everything vivid and fleeting and ripe for the taking right now. holding out.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.